Okay, with Election Commission, with the administrative election, Mr. Wall, Kent Wall, if you would, Mr. Wall, or would you mind introducing your associates, and if you please?
I'd be happy to do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. To my right is our chairman, Ron Buchanan. To my immediate left is the Deputy Administrator, Joan Nixon, and to the far left of where I'm sitting is our Finance Manager, Bill Hayden.
Thank you. And there, before we get started, there's naturally a question that has to be asked, and that is, can you operate within the mayor's proposed budget?
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I have to say that we cannot, and my purpose today is to explain that answer.
Okay, if you would, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Our chairman has a few comments he would like to make in the beginning.
Before Mr. Wall explains our budget request for this year, I'd like to make some statements about the Election Commission. I don't know if people realize it or not, but we're not a department of metro government. The commissioners are not appointed by the mayor. We're supposed to be a totally independent body. We're created by the state legislature. We're governed by the state legislature. Our commissioners are nominated by the state representatives, confirmed by the state election commission. We hire our own commissioner, or administrator, who's Mr. Wall now, and the state law dictates our responsibilities. When I was appointed, I was given this book. That is a book of just Tennessee election laws, and we're mandated by state to fulfill the requirements in this. And it goes from everything from voter registration to polling locations to hours, etc. So we have sort of a unique situation in that we are responsible to the government. We actually report to the state election coordinator, and he surveys how good of a job we were doing. But this is the third year I've been here, and the third time I've told this body that we need additional funding. We don't have enough funding to adequately do the job. If you all remember, in 2012, after the presidential election, that was one of the first things I was given along with this book, is a report about that thick from the state election coordinator as to deficiencies in the election in Davidson County for the presidential election. I came to y'all the first year I was here, this was my third year, and told you that one of the problems was we had inadequate funding to carry out the responsibilities of our department. Our budget had been cut over the years from $4,600,000 in 08 to $3,100,000 in 14, $4 million in 15. So we're not even back yet to the levels that we were at in 08. Now, that's created all sorts of problems. Each year we submit budget requests to the Budget and Finance. The state law says that the governing body of each county will adequately fund the cost of putting on the elections to the Election Commission. That applies in Davidson County, Humphreys County, whatever county it is, all 95 of them, that's the case. And we are trying to adhere to that. But we submit budget requests, and the umbilical cord between us and Metro is finances. Y'all fund us. And I'm just amazed that the Budget and Finance Commission knows how to run our department better than we do. Because we submit a budget request, as an example this year, we need 100 new, or not new, but additional polling, electronic poll books for the election. The last two elections, I've gone out and visited about 15 or 20 poll sites on election day. And every time I walk in to tell them what a great job they're doing, they say, we need more poll books. We're having to share them. If there's a change of address, it ties up the poll book for 20 minutes, and we can't do anything else. We don't have enough of them. So we submitted that to Budget and Finance, and they said, no, you don't need those. They just whacked it out of our budget. We had 12 employees last year that were part-time employees we asked to be made full-time because we put a lot of time and effort in training these employees, and then they leave for 50 cents an hour or more, $1 an hour or more. We need stability. Well, rather than changing them from part-time to full-time, they cut them out of the budget entirely. So I don't know why the Budget and Finance thinks they can do a better job of this than we can. Out of frustration last year, I will tell you that I talked to the State Election Commission and asked for a legal opinion as to what minimum we could do to put on elections. Because if we were going to be funded at 80%, I was ready to give you all an 80% election. And I was told we could not cut any quarters. We had to fully staff for elections. We had to fully do everything the law requires us to do, even if we don't have enough money to do it. So, the issue now is we've done a pretty good job the last 3 elections. We've stayed out of the paper. But we've done it for 3 reasons. One is just pure luck. We've not had an employee that got sick at a key time. We're on such a skeleton crew that about 3 weeks before one of the elections last year, the manager of our IT department got sick and went to the hospital. Had he not gotten well and come back, it would have been an absolute disaster because he had to program all the voting machines, electronic poll books, that type thing, and we don't have backups for people like that. We're on a skeleton crew. We have avoided having a key employee quit at a very critical time, shortly before election. If that happens, we're in trouble. And we've gotten by because this body has given us additional funding that Budget and Finance hasn't seen fit to give us. And for that, we are eternally grateful. This budget was presented to and unanimously approved by the commissioners of the Election Commission. We have a meeting scheduled June 11th. When we go back, whatever cuts are made in this budget, the commission will review those cuts, and they have a decision to make. They can do one of 3 things. Now, I think y'all should know this. We don't try to hide anything. One, we can continue skating on thin ice and hope for the best that's happened in the last year or 2. We're sort of running out of luck, though, I'm going to tell you. Number 2, and I don't want to do that. Number 2 is we can spend the money and ask for a supplemental request in the spring. Well, I don't like doing that either. I mean, that's spending money you don't have and hasn't been approved. The third thing is the state statute says you shall adequately fund us, and we can seek redress in Chancery Court. I don't want to do that either. So all 3 of those options are really not favorable to me. But that's up to the commissioners, and we'll discuss that when we find out what we've happened on the budget. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wall and let him tell you about our request.
Mr. Wall, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. I will get into the budget details shortly, but I have a few things I'd like to mention to sort of set the stage. Part of it along the same lines that the chairman was just talking about. After last year's budget process, which to me was a first experience at that, and the council provided additional funding to address some of our needs, I was very hopeful that as a result of that confidence that we could successfully carry out the 2014 election cycle, and if we were able to do that, we would have proven our competency to conduct the election operations. And it had to be conducted to the state mandated level. The standards we have to adhere to are established by the state of Tennessee. I was very hopeful that we would be able to anticipate in this new budget request additional funding to enable us to keep the momentum going that we had established in calendar year 14. However, with the mayor's response to our FY16 budget request, such is not the case. The Davidson County Election Commission is solely responsible under Tennessee law for elections and all election operations to include achieving mandated performance standards. On the other hand, Metro Finance seems to have assumed the role of controlling the Davidson County Election Commission via funding and has what amounts to a line item veto over all operational considerations, such as staffing, compensation, and equipment used on election day. In fact, Metro Finance controls the allocation of the resources, both personnel and funding that we need to carry out our mandated responsibilities. To me, that is a classic conundrum. In any enterprise...
Excuse me, Mr. Wall. I would appreciate it, Chair would appreciate if you kept the comments to the budget, to the actual budget. If you want to show you have a loss, you have a loss. If you show you've explained, you've expressed your concerns with how you feel about the finance department, but we'd appreciate if you would keep it to the figures and just describe why you're requesting more, funding, or why you've been cut, or why you need additional funding, so the council members and members of this committee can respond to those questions or those statements. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. In your materials, you will find a document, horizontal format, called the FY16 budget hearing. And if you will turn with me to page 5, it's the same document page that Chairman Buchanan was referencing. And if you'll go over to FY16, you'll see our requested amount and then the mayor's response, which represents a 15% reduction in the request. On page 6, I have broken down our budget request. It follows the same format as the budget modifications that were submitted in February. Let's focus first on the elections. These are fully staffed polling locations for countywide elections, and there are 3 of those in the FY. This is broken down into early voting of 289,000 and election day of 575,000, and you'll see the total that we requested. The thing to keep in mind is that each of these elections follows the same template that we perfected in 14. That template consists of 11 early voting sites and 161 polling locations on election day, all fully staffed with fully trained poll workers and the equipment necessary to carry off the election. Our total budget for the elections also includes the City of Oak Hill election and the August 16 startup expenses, which we start to incur about 90 days before the actual election. A footnote on the March election. The funds will be almost 100% refunded to the Metro General Fund by the state of Tennessee. That money does not come back to the Election Commission, but rather to the General Fund. What is interesting to me is that the mayor's response is exactly to the dollar the amount that we had proposed in our budget, which is extraordinarily good, we think. Staff needs is another matter. Last year we had approved 2 recruiter positions, but those recruiter positions were only funded at about 50% of the actual expense. The $97,000 that we requested and the mayor's budget reflects approval is to bring those positions up to full funding. The next item is special voting services. Most of you probably know that as early voting, military, absentee, prison, nursing home, etc. This is a multi-year request for 2 full-time positions. Those positions are currently occupied by people that are part-time that we're always at risk in losing. And their budget, the salary and fringe benefits would be $115,700. We have the same situation in our voter registration department where we're using part-time people. We need to move those to full-time to gain some insurance and security that we can keep these people employed. They're all fully trained. That's again another $115,700. Of that total request, the mayor had reduced that $231,000. Those positions were not approved. On page 7 at the top, this is an item that I think has caused a lot of confusion, at least in my meetings with various council members. This concerns 12 full-time trained staff positions in the Election Commission that are there today. However, they are classified as part-time positions. They are funded this year in the non-recurring part of the budget. We chose to bring those out of the non-recurring side and put them in the recurring side and fund them, and the total funding would be $470,000. In the initial response we got back from in the mayor's budget, we lost the 12 positions as well as the funding. That would represent, if it stood, a 38% reduction in our staff needs. In a conversation I had shortly thereafter with Mr. Riebling, we reached a compromise. The 12 positions would be restored, however, the funding would go away. And my commitment to Mr. Riebling was that I would do my very best to make sure that we could accommodate that cut somewhere else in the budget. And the only other place that that cut can come from is from the elections, which is about a $470,000 reduction in the elections part of our budget request. The next item is an increase in pay for poll officials. This approval will have extraordinarily beneficial effects with our poll workers. What this does is take what a poll worker is on election day is currently paid $120. This would take that to $150. Remember, that's a 14-hour day minimum, so we're about $10 an hour for these poll workers. To take the officer from $180 to $200, and the training rate from $15 to $30. And by the way, that's for a 3-hour, in some cases 4-hour class. So clearly the $15 was inadequate. The $30 will be well received. The chairman mentioned the next item, which is the rental of the electronic poll books. This is to get rental of 100 additional poll books. We own about 430 right now. That was the original purchase, but we need more. And the supplier has them available to rent. Now, instead of recommending a purchase of these, we're recommending the rental because this equipment is not the most current model. It works fine for us, no problems with it. But the question then becomes, do we want to put it in the capital request and buy equipment that is no longer being made, or do we just want to rent them as long as they're available? We recommended the rental. Mayor has disapproved that request. We also had a new program in here. This is called the Voter Outreach Campaign. It's something that several council members asked last year that we do more of, which is an outreach program to the citizens of the county, make sure that eligible voters are registered to vote, those that have change of address situations, that's taken care of. And oh yes, by the way, we're also recruiting poll workers. And that message is a part of our ongoing effort right now. We asked for $15,000 to expand that outreach, and that was disapproved. The last item is voter registration requirement. This is for 3 part-time positions, not people working full-time, in anticipation of a dramatic increase in voter registration activity and change of address activity in the lead up to the presidential election in 2016. That was also disapproved. The effect of what the mayor has not approved in our budget is about a 23% reduction, or about $1 out of every 4 that we asked for. The critical items here, if we'd like to focus on the critical items, the staff needs, where we requested 4 full-time staff members, we could get by with 2. Part-time personnel, I'd rather not see $470,000 taken out of the elections part of the budget to pay for these people. We clearly need to rent the electronic poll books. So those are the items that I consider to be the most pressing needs that we have. And with that, I hope that we can enjoy the same confidence from the council that we did last year when we got extra supplemental funding, which allowed us to really get kickstart what we were trying to do in 2014. With that, we'll be here to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. Councilman Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's establish some baseline for our discussion here. Are we in agreement that your budget is $1,024,000 more than last year?
Yes.
Okay. Then let me respond to one of the statements about what the finance department does. It does the same thing that we do. We have to run an entire government. And there are an awful lot of departments, from social services to public works, that would kill to have an increased budget. So with that being said, that's why the finance department reacts the way they do, because they have a responsibility to the entire city, not just to one part of the government. It's the same responsibility that this council has. Let's go through a couple of these things, and these are no surprise questions for you, Mr. Wall, because I'm still perplexed, and I know you're going to explain it to me again, because I'm very slow, about renting the poll books. It's $105,000 is my understanding for 100 poll books that are essentially obsolete, but we have to keep using them because that's where we are with our technology.
That's correct.
At what point are we going to buy better technology, and are we better off with a capital purchase of technology that will last us a longer period of time than just renting? And the first part of that question should have been, how many years are we going to have to rent this obsolete equipment before we get to a point where we're replacing the equipment?
Well, certainly I think the rental has to be through the presidential election year, because without the poll books, what happens is that the voting process is slowed way down, and the lines get longer and the voters get frustrated. So this equipment is designed to move that along. So I would say at least through the high peak.
No, and I get that, but my question is I assume there's new technology that eventually we're going to get. Is that new technology incompatible with our current technology? I mean, I'm just wondering, if we looked at a purchase of 100 books a year for a certain period of time, that gets us to less obsolete, I'm really inarticulate today, that gets us to up to current kinds of poll books. So my question is, if we were to buy 100 of whatever's not obsolete, is it compatible with what we're doing?
The equipment that I'm familiar with is not compatible. Now, that doesn't mean that I know from all the suppliers what would be available there. We just haven't explored that. It could be. It very well could be.
I mean, I'm not quibbling with the notion that you need the technology. It's just, my brain just can't comprehend us spending several years, hundreds of thousands of dollars ultimately if it's 2 or 3 years, and then have to make a huge capital purchase after that, which I assume it will be a large one, because ultimately we're going to have up-to-date poll books going forward. Then the positions, the 4 positions that you requested, special voting services and voter registration, that was not included in your request. That was not part of your budget last year, correct?
Yes, it was.
It was at what level?
At the same
level. Were they part-time or full-time?
These are full-time positions. They were funded, the request was at the same amount.
I know the request was there. Are the people in those jobs, did you hire them anyway, even though they weren't funded last year as well?
We hired them as part-time employees.
Okay, that was my question. So they're currently part-time positions.
And they're paid at a part-time rate.
And then the two other issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me. Thank you, committee. With regard to the 12 positions, have they been restored, or do they exist now? And I don't know whether I ask you or ask Finance Office.
I think there was some confusion around whether or not those positions were being reduced in the budget, and we got that clarified, and there were no FTE reductions.
Okay. And then the last issue is, our poll worker pay, while not where we all wanted it to be for Davidson County, was, my memory is that it was near the top. With this increase, will we be compensating our poll workers near the top of poll workers in the state of Tennessee?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Weiner.
Thank you, Chair. So what is the retention rate for poll workers?
I'm not sure I can give you an accurate figure. It's pretty high. What we have is natural attrition. We have, on election day, we need about 1,400 to 1,500 poll workers assigned to the precincts. And last year, at each election, it was about 100 to 110 people that just simply did not show up with no reason given. Now, we naturally treat those people. We don't, there are going to be problems going forward, and so we're constantly replacing those. But I think that we've done some things in 14, and we're continuing in 15 to reach out to our poll workers to show appreciation for what they do. And that has been well received. I've gotten plenty of comments from poll workers how much they appreciate that gesture. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but it is something that we're trying to do to say we appreciate what you're doing. So I think we're going to continue to experience whatever the natural turnover is going to be. It's probably 120 to 150 poll workers out of our total roster of about 23 or 2,400 today.
What do you see as the greatest impediment to hiring and or keeping poll workers?
I think that once a first-time poll worker gets through that first election, they come back. The only impediment to regular folks working is that their health just won't allow them to continue to do it, or they have a job conflict, or there's a family circumstance. The attraction of the new poll workers is the issue. Last year we recruited 1,174. We had applications from 1,174 poll workers, but we were only able to close the deal with just short of 800 of those. And the biggest reason that we were not able to close the deal is they never took the initiative to complete the paperwork that is required. So we lose them right on the front end. It's pretty high. But what I've found is in talking to people just at random about being a poll worker, they're intrigued by it. And for lots of young people, $120 a day was a pretty good incentive for one day's work. So I guess the impediment is that they realize all of a sudden they've got to complete this paperwork, which is pretty scary when you realize what's required in the way of your personal ID. And the other part of it is there's the prospect of working that hard day.
So what I'm kind of leading to is I'm trying to wrap my head around, is it the need to increase their pay to retain them? Is that a critical piece of your retention of these poll workers? How much does that weigh in when we're looking at how we have to allocate funds?
My personal experience in talking to poll workers is that for the first-time poll workers, that increase is going to be a very attractive number, especially on the training rate. For the veteran poll workers, it's less about the money than it is about the need to fulfill the civic duty. That's what I keep hearing. But I will tell you, in just talking with poll workers, the fact that it is low relative to what they're asked to do is weighing on them. Currently at $120 for a 14-hour day, that's about like $88.57 an hour. Mm-hmm. For 14 hours. That's a lot to ask. And I think the gesture toward that is going to say, we understand what we're asking you to do and we appreciate it. I think it's going to go down well.
Okay, so I have another question. The status of your backup equipment, I know you said you need the 100 poll books. What is the incidence of breakdown during a typical election day? It's
very low. And we have a backup system to troubleshoot those machines as they're at the precincts. We have a system of, excuse me, of rovers who are out in the county. They have backup equipment with them, but 9 times out of 10 they can troubleshoot it on the spot and keep it running. Very, very infrequently do we have an electronic poll book that just quits.
John, would it be appropriate for me to ask that we get some type of report back with regard to the cost of new technology in terms of the books?
You can ask.
Consider it asked. So that would be something that we'd like to see so that we can weigh the decision moving forward with regard to purchasing those new books or not. My next question would be, and thanks for humoring me, last year we talked about the scanning system to get those voter registrations scanned in maybe more accurately and in a more time-efficient way, which may support your employee issue in terms of necessary staffing. Where are we on evaluating that scanning system that we talked about last year?
We've looked at that, Council Lady, and actually it won't save any time. The technology is such that the only reliable scanning is from the records we get from the Department of Safety. That represents about 25% of our records. So 75% of it comes in, the scanning equipment doesn't work, or it misallocates it somehow. Somebody used the example of they tried to scan a document of one of the mayoral candidates, David Fox, and it came back David Fax. So we have to go back and check every one of those entries. So in effect, we're really not saving any time at all.
Okay, great. Thank you for your help. I appreciate it. Look forward to that report.
Councilman Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was one of the questions I had, was if you could give us a cost analysis of what it would cost to replace all of the equipment, to where everything is compatible. That way we can kind of get an idea of is it wise to finance something over a 30-year period, or is it not wise? The next question that I have is the equipment that you're using today. How long have you had these e-books? How long have you had those?
They were purchased in 2011, and they were deployed for the first time in 2012.
Okay, and they're already obsolete? Did I mishear?
There's a later version from that same supplier that is a newer generation of that same technology.
Okay, and then if additional funds are not found, and the other question I would ask of your finance person is, give me a breakdown of is the presidential election year, is that your most expensive year as far as the election commission is concerned? Is that your costliest year, is when there's a presidential primary?
The presidential primary and the election, the presidential election.
There's only two mics, so you'll have to share.
The presidential preference primary is an expensive election, but the presidential election itself is very, very likewise.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that question is because the first year I was here on the council, I think I remember, and I don't want to box myself here, but I think I remember a pretty substantial drop in your budget, and one of the questions I asked was why. It was because and I think the answer was because the presidential election it costs more money, and the next year you just don't have the same expense. So I would like to know the history. I thought I had it here and I don't. I'll look it up myself, but I'd like for you to confirm that for us if you could. And then I guess my final question to you is, in the event that additional funding is not found, as an example for your 12 full-time employees, then what I think I heard you say was the only place to cut is from the elections budget. So I'm assuming that will be early voting locations. Is that, and I don't want to read too deeply into it, but I want to make sure I understand what consequences may exist.
That's possible, Councilman. We really haven't looked at where that cut could be funded. I'm hoping for the alternative. But I wouldn't think we would take it all out of early voting. I think we try to spread it out. And we're talking about 3 elections also. So $100,000, $150,000 per election, and we could not really kill any aspect of that election to be able to do that.
Okay. Well, if we can get those questions answered, that'd be wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council Lady Allen.
Thank you. Just one question. I appreciate the way y'all run elections. I've never had any trouble, and the poll workers are always very, very courteous and helpful. Just to follow up on those 2 questions about the report, could you also maybe provide some information that somebody might say how long we expect the next generation of poll books to last, and if they only last 4 years, does it make sense to buy them if then we have obsolete equipment on our hand, or is there a better way to have a rental system that would automatically update that? I mean, with that type of technology changing so quickly, it seems like rental should be the less expensive option.
Yes, ma'am. Will do.
I thought we were finished. Councilman Bidney.
Oh, I just want to make sure we put on the wish list to cover the cost that they are requiring.
Which cost are you talking about?
The minimum cost that they were requesting for the
poll books, or?
Well, what is the minimum cost that you guys need to be able to meet the requirements?
$686,000.
That number.
That number?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Mr. Wall, also, is there a date you can provide with us where you think you could get the information concerning the poll books that's been asked? I mean, you have a general idea, general time you think it'd take to get that, provide us with that information?
Mr. Chairman, not really. I don't know how far-reaching that question could be. We'll try to do it as quickly as we can.
Okay, and also make sure when you do, just provide that to Ms. Waller if you would.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.